What?
Goodbye, Doctor.
Okay, that's not exactly what I had in mind when I said that Shadow ruined the Doctor's life. But hey, let's talk about how he was actually involved in Project Shadow. Hey guys, it's the Leo Kojem and welcome to another video. Hard to believe I'm actually back again, but after mentioning this idea while talking about Genesis Waves and the Ancients from Sonic Boom, 2 years ago? Wow! But hey, I just had to make this video. This one has been a long time coming, and is a pretty major one that I've had in my pocket for quite a while. And I've only got a little bit of time before Sonic Movie 3 trailer comes out, and probably rains on my parade, so I'm gonna be finally talking about this theory video that I wrote a script for immediately after Sonic Movie 2 came out, and just never made. You've read the title of this video and know what's up. How did Shadow the Hedgehog ruin Ivo's life? Well, before I answer that question, I just want to say if you like this video and want to see me make more theory content like it about Sonic and other things like it, then be sure to like and subscribe. And hit the little bell, follow my social media, and hey, maybe give me a tip on my coffee for only $5 or more if you're feeling generous. It helps me out and makes more content like this possible. With that being said, back to it. So, let's talk about the Sonic movies. I mean, what's not to love about the Sonic movies? A fresh look into the franchise and its characters that introduces faces new and old to it in ways that we've never quite seen in Sonic before, exciting action that keeps us on the edge of our seats, and a lot of heart for the whole family to enjoy. The Sonic movies are fantastic, but the end of movie 2 revealed to us something rather interesting in the fact that the Earth is tangled with aliens more than we thought, with the likes of Project Shadow being a thing. So how does that tie into movie Ivo Robotnik and his history as well as the past and future of this franchise? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. Okay, so Shadow the Hedgehog has arrived in the film franchise and will likely be the main focus of the next film. This means that we're getting an adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2 in some form with elements of 2005's Shadow the Hedgehog thrown into the mix according to reports. Cool stuff, right? While Shadow the Hedgehog is an interesting game that'll bring some crazy elements to the table, it's Sonic Adventure 2 that I want to focus on and give a brief rundown for the uninformed. In the game Sonic Adventure 2, we learned that Dr. Eggman's grandfather, Gerald Robotnik, was part of a secret government project dubbed Project Shadow. Thanks to him and some aliens that we really don't need to talk about, Gerald was able to create the ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog, and his purpose was to cure his granddaughter, Maria's terminal illness. But thanks to government meddling, the project was deemed a failure, and GUN was sent to clean house, wiping any and all evidence of Project Shadow from any records, including the people involved and the Hedgehog himself. Maria was shot and killed while Gerald Robotnik, enraged by this, created the Eclipse Cannon to destroy the planet as revenge and set Shadow on the warpath to set it off. Of course, Sonic and friends and a redeemed Shadow were able to stop that from happening. But yeah, that's Project Shadow. And we know that the end credits scene revealed that Project Shadow is very much a thing within the film franchise. We see that, like in Sonic Adventure 2, he has been put into some sort of stasis pod and is waiting to be unearthed. While I don't have a lot of answers as to what will happen to him going forward, I do believe I have answers to how Shadow the Hedgehog relates to Dr. Robotnik, our antagonist of the franchise, and how Shadow potentially ruined Eggman's life. But to understand that, first let's discuss the Doctor's history and his psyche within the movie franchise. To start with, we know that this version of Eggman is an orphan, with no true family to his name. He doesn't really mention a family that adopted him or anything. From what we can gather about Robotnik as well is that he didn't really have any friends growing up, just his intellect to accompany him as he moved forward in life. This didn't really help him much though, because it led him to be the target of bullies. Granted, he was able to make sure to take care of them like he always does with incredible violence that hospitalized the guy for months. Gotta love it. Luckily for the Doctor, it was that same intellect that would prevail for him as he made his way into university, where he would get not just one, not two, not even three, but 5 PhDs, and that of course landed himself a job with the United States government, where he was able to truly make his mark on the world. When the name Robotnik is brought up to other high-ranking members of the US government, everyone in the room immediately knows who he is. Clearly, the man has left enough of an impression to where he's pulled off several successful missions and has enough funding for everything we see that he has in the first movie, and even the weird satellite stuff that he has in the second, as that stuff was clearly there beforehand. Hell, Dr. Robotnik even makes a joke about it.
Ever wonder where your tax dollars are going?
He's been a busy guy working for the government probably for decades. Despite everything, they've been able to put up with him because, as our favorite GUN commander says, he's clearly brought about results in every mission he's been a part of. The Doctor's own words are that he's never lost a fight after all. Well, that is until Sonic entered the picture. We all know the events of the first and second movies, so I don't think it's worth touching on those, but as the films go on, he clearly begins to gain an obsession with Sonic, especially in the second film. Keep that specific detail in mind because I have thoughts about that I'll come to later. So, with the Doctor's history laid out before us, what exactly does that tell us about him? Well, for one, I think the most obvious thing is that since he was a child, the Doctor has been incredibly lonely. And you may think, no, that's not true. Throughout the films, he's shown that he doesn't really need anybody and is willing to do whatever it takes to put himself on top, no matter what. He constantly mocks and belittles anyone for needing other people and will be willing to sell anyone out to get further ahead. And you know what? You'd be right about that. But despite that, I still think that the Doctor is incredibly lonely and is actually somewhat jealous of others for having people around them, at least deep down inside. Now, throughout the first film especially, we talk about that mocking and belittling of anyone for needing others and not machines. But the way in which those lines are delivered are often over the top and as if he's trying a little too hard to put others down for the sake of lifting himself up. His confrontations with Major Bennington in movie 1 really get into it.
Ah, my babies. Ooh, look what came out of my egg sack. You know what I love about machines? They do what they're told. They follow their program. They don't need time off to get drunk and put the boat in the water. You do what you're told. Stand over there on the edge of your personal abyss and watch my machines do your job.
Despite everything, I feel a sort of sense of denial and longing that he does need these things in his life. But you know what? I think that's shown even better when it comes to his relationship with Agent Stone. Agent Stone has been the Doctor's faithful assistant, doing everything he can to serve him despite the Doctor's more interesting quirks. Now, it's obvious how Agent Stone feels about the Doctor, but how does Robotnik himself feel? I think that despite everything, Stone sort of does fill that need for companionship that he secretly desires. Sure, the Doctor treats him like trash, but it's the fact that he keeps coming back to him that makes one realize that he needs Agent Stone as well. I mean, the guy turned his likeness into an actual stone back on Mushroom Hill Zone. The guy is nothing without his right-hand man. He's the one true ally he's got in this messed up world of his. You gotta love it. Knuckles apparently did, as Robotnik is so eager to prove that he doesn't need anyone in his life by betraying anyone who he could have potentially teamed up with or formed a bond with. You could say that these sorts of betrayals are something that he's learned. Very interesting, wouldn't you think? There's also the fact that throughout all the mocking and belittling, Robotnik puts a lot of mockery on parents, or more specifically, mothers. We all cringed when we heard this line out of context when the movie was coming out, but this...
I was spitting out formulas while you were still spitting up formula.
I was breastfed, actually.
Nice. Rub that in my orphan face.
I cannot believe I'm talking about breastfeeding in a fucking Sonic video, but here we go. This is a very important line. This is a very important line that tells us quite a bit about Robotnik. We've already learned a lot about the fact that he is an orphan and lacked a lot of proper development that a lot of children need in their lives. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with not having been breastfed, but that's not the point. Anyway, there's a clear comparison made here with the line between Tom and Robotnik that does actually show a longing for parentage that he does not have, even if it was played as a joke. That can be said for all of the other scenes where he discusses parents, and more specifically mothers, but for whatever reason, as I started writing this, I decided that this would be the line that I decide to talk about. Moving on though, this makes a perfect segue into my next topic, how Dr. Ivo Robotnik parallels Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles and the themes at play there. First off, let's talk about the blue blur himself, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic, like Eggman, is an orphan that was left without a family to call his own very early on in his life. Having lost Longclaw to the Echidna clan, Sonic was forced into isolation on the planet Earth, simply living his life out in hiding. We don't really know a lot about movie Tails beforehand, but we know he grew up as a loner, having faced bullying for his two tails. He really only had his inventions to keep him company until Sonic did what he did in the first movie and it got his attention, clearly fascinating him, leading him to seek out the blue blur himself. And then of course we have Knuckles, who, like Sonic, lost everything due to the events of the film. His entire tribe, his family, was slaughtered in the pursuit of power that didn't really belong to them, or really anyone for that matter. And so he went alone to become the toughest warrior in the galaxy in his quest for the Master Emerald. Like Eggman, all three of the Sonic characters that are currently in the film franchise are orphans who have been abandoned or mistreated in some sort of way, forced to live alone and be shunned by a world that they believe never really wanted them. But you know what makes them different from Eggman? The fact that they have a found family that allowed them to grow stronger together rather than apart. Sonic and his loneliness led him to longing for others in life. Rather than deny that fact and mock others for it like Eggman does, it drove him to the events that would lead him to his parents and eventual brothers. Tails found solace in tinkering from relentless bullying that is all too familiar to the Doctor. But rather than close himself off or lash out like a caged animal, he found new love with a brother and a family. And Knuckles, who found strength and self-reliance, found even greater power in those he loved in both Sonic and Tails and Tom and Maddie, but even Wade and the Whipples in the Knuckles series. So it's clear that the films have a general theme of found family, and this version of Dr. Eggman is the antithesis to that, despite having gone through a similar upbringing to all of the heroes that we have been faced with so far. It's for that reason that Eggman wants to destroy this found family. Why let the rodents have what he can't have after all? I mean, not that he needs it anyway, but after them being such a thorn in his side, he has every right to eliminate said family. But the question is, why does all of this matter, and how does it relate to the fact that Shadow the Hedgehog ruined Robotnik's life? Well, I'll tell you. It's finally time to talk about what exactly I think happened all that time ago. It was a little over 50 years ago. Dr. Gerald Robotnik had been working for the US government and had been for a very long time, and like his grandson, had made many scientific breakthroughs that would bring the world into the future. And of course, with a loving family with two healthy grandchildren, Maria and Ivo, what more could a man want, right? Gerald Robotnik's life was perfect. That is, until young Maria fell ill and caught a deadly disease with no discernible cure. Maria was going to die, and there was nothing they could do. Or at least, nothing that no normal man could do. But Gerald was a Robotnik, one of, if not the smartest men on the planet, so he was going to do everything he could to save Maria. I imagine that Gerald operated on a similar way that Ivo did with the government, mostly kind of doing his own thing so long as it was in their interests and being called into aid when it was necessary. It's because of that Gerald Robotnik searched the world to find what could possibly cure Maria, and somewhere along the way, likely running into the owl civilizations, he decided that the only way to save her was to create ultimate life, something that could act as the antidote to Maria and allow her to live a long and healthy life. But not just her, any human that would fall into sickness would be able to call upon the ultimate life form for aid and receive healing that they deserved. So, he proposes the Project Shadow for the government, and they agree to get it started, while taking heavy interest in keeping close observation on the Doctor as he does so. All of the Robotniks are moved to a secret research facility to begin the project, whether that be up aboard the Space Colony Ark or somewhere on the planet. It doesn't really matter at this point, But it happened, and the Robotniks are separated from the rest of the world as Project Shadow went into full swing. Quickly, the ultimate lifeform was created, and Maria made friends with a being now dubbed Shadow the Hedgehog. The two had a very close bond with one another and were practically inseparable, like siblings. But you know who else was there? Ivo Robotnik. You've seen the thumbnail, and I've already mentioned him before in this story. Ivo Robotnik was there. I like to believe that he was a pretty young kid at this time, definitely younger than his cousin Maria. He already started showing signs of his advanced intellect at that age, but even then, he really was just a normal kid. A normal kid who loved his family and loved his cousin Maria and idolized his grandpa Gerald. Ivo wasn't forgotten about, and would spend a lot of time with both Maria and Shadow too. The three Robotnik siblings were happy together, even if they knew of what could happen to Maria in the end. When the kids weren't having fun and figuring out the world for themselves, Gerald and Shadow worked tirelessly to make sure that Shadow would be the cure to Maria. Of course, along the way, Shadow ended up becoming far more than they bargained for, being capable of combat and skills that Gerald and even the government themselves didn't fully understand. But the government knew there was a clear untapped potential in the ultimate life form that Gerald wasn't seeing. Being something to heal would be nice, sure, but it was clear that Project Shadow would be a far more suitable weapon than some sort of cure. So, the government and Gerald would have countless arguments about what was to be done with Shadow. The children, including Shadow himself, were kept out of this. They didn't need to hear what men like Walters had in mind for them. And it didn't matter anyways. Gerald Robotnik blocked the government at every turn, refusing to give them access to the base and the project, as he wanted only to cure Maria and help make the world a better place at any cost. Of course, the government would simply not have that, and knew that they needed to eliminate Gerald and his team and commandeer Project Shadow for themselves. That fateful night, a raid was set on the Ark that ended with the scientists dead, Gerald detained, and the poor children left to figure out what to do. Maria, being the older one, had figured out that the soldiers wanted Shadow, and told Ivo to hide while she tried to get Shadow out of the facility. Ivo didn't like that plan and wanted to help, but she insisted. Maria tried to help Shadow escape, and she did, but not of course without paying the ultimate price, when she was shot by an agent, with poor Shadow left to watch, unable to do anything to save her. Shadow himself eventually would be put into stasis, with the government unable to do anything with him, and Gerald, being completely uncooperative following the death of his granddaughter, was simply executed. While the raid was successful, everything ended up being a complete failure, with the one thing that kept Gerald completely compliant gone, and none of them really knowing how to make Shadow cooperate either. It was decided that he would be kept in stasis for the indeterminate future. However, one good thing did come of this. Little Ivo Robotnik had been found, scared and alone, hiding under a bed within the Ark. Another Robotnik was alive, and one that was clearly starting to develop an intellect that could be just as great, if not greater than his grandfather's. This was perfect. So, what do you do with this golden opportunity? Simple, you mold the child into exactly what you want him to be. Someone else who will be able to create more weapons for your government and will be able to be one of your greatest allies. Now, I know I said that Ivo was pretty young, but I believe that after all of this, his mind was completely wiped clean of any information related to Project Shadow, including his grandfather and his cousin Maria. How did they do this? Not particularly sure, but I believe that they were capable of making it so that Ivo would forget everything. And there are reasons that I believe this is the case that I'll get into in a bit. But for now, Ivo was then kept an eye on for his entire childhood, and the US government would do anything that they could to nudge the child towards working with the government. Little things like making sure his adopted parents would get him army toys and tanks and the like as his main toys over things like superheroes or robots or anything like that. Having a science fair judged by high-ranking government officials like the president, who mentioned that, you could have a great career working for another president someday, and the like. Little bits of subliminal messaging that would get him exactly where he was in the first film. And of course, when he actually got there, even with his more eccentric qualities, they managed to make sure that he would be everything he needs to be, just as useful as Gerald was. He had his victories and earned his stuff, no doubt, But the government always wanted him to be where he was so that he could be Gerald, and maybe even get more work done on Project Shadow if the time ever called for it. It's just a pity that he was so difficult to work with, but either way they had an incredible asset on their hands, so one could deem him a success of sorts. That's what I think that Ivo's connection was to Project Shadow. He was there, and it was because of that project that it ruined his life and made him into the person he is today. But there are two big things within this video that I mentioned that I would come back to, and now that I've told the story, I can finally come back to them. First up, we have the topic of brainwashing and memory erasure, and I'm near certain that this was done to Ivo Robotnik. First, let's talk about something very interesting about the first film. Did you know that the idea of wiping someone off the face of the earth is brought up 3 separate times in the film, and each of them have to do with Dr. Eggman? Yup, pretty crazy, right? First time is in the scene where Eggman confronts Tom, to where they have this exchange.
Hey, tough guy, I'm a cop. You're threatening an officer. How can you threaten somebody who never existed?
The second time has to do with the scene where Wade is being interrogated by Eggman's entourage in the police station.
If you give me a second, I can get an outside line.
No, don't be bothered. You just sit there and be you. Sless.
No one's gonna erase my memory here?
And of course, in the end of the film, the Wachowskis ask Walters about him.
Oh, hey, I guess we can close the file on that Robotnik guy, huh? Just disappeared.
I'm sorry, but no such person exists, or ever has existed.
I wish that were true.
Ain't that just interesting? Now, I know what you're thinking, but Lyoko Gem, this stuff is building up to Eggman simply being wiped from the government's databases at the end of the first movie. They didn't even know they were going to get a second movie, or even third film at the time, and couldn't have possibly been planning for Shadow during the first movie. And you know what? You'd be right about that. They absolutely weren't planning for Shadow back then, or if they were, I doubt that they were doing so thoroughly that this would be any kind of a tease. But it's all about recontextualization, baby! This is something that we've actually seen in other instances since the release of the second movie. One of the best examples being the echidnas going after Sonic in the first movie. Before, we simply believed that it was because of his incredible power that he has, but now of course we know that it was all because of the war between the owls and the echidnas that had been going on for centuries. So yeah, to say that this plays into the idea of Robotnik being wiped because of Project Shadow isn't too far-fetched, because we've seen instances of recontextualization happen within the films before. One may also argue that my point only talks about how the government can and will wipe someone off their database. However, I also want to bring up the counterpoint that Wade himself directly mentions flashing him, like in Men in Black. Seems like too good of a detail to come back to, and would add further history to this backstory. But yeah, those are my thoughts on mind wiping. If this theory isn't true, then it's just possible that he was simply too young to remember, but hey, it works. I think he was mind wiped. But whether or not this happened, one thing is clear. A lingering memory left an impression on the Doctor's subconscious and lied dormant in the deep recesses of his mind, never truly brought to his attention until a certain Blue Devil sped his way into his life. Well, we see that Robotnik's obsession with Sonic is because of everything that Sonic did to him. I mean, removing him from the Earth and stranding him on the Mushroom Planet for the year would make anybody become the bane of someone's existence. But there's a certain unhealthy obsession that I believe goes even further than that. You've probably already figured out what I mean by now, but I believe that the obsession with Sonic is because of the distant memory of Shadow. Deep down inside, I believe that Robotnik remembers Shadow the Hedgehog, and seeing Sonic sort of awakened something in him that made him want to capture Sonic more than anything in the world. It's why he lives rent-free in his head, because of this deep-seated trauma. Man, I just came up with a pretty tragic backstory for the good old Doc. Guy had his family wiped out by the government, only for them to guide him in his life to be exactly where his grandfather was. Clearly this means that he will learn about all of this and will turn over a new leaf, right?
Not just wrong, you're stupid. Now wait just a minute. Andrew...
I honestly and truly believe that if Eggman learns about this, he honestly will not care. I think he'll believe that if the world really built him to be what he is today, then it's even all the more reason for him to gain all the power and be its one true leader, standing alone as the one most high. But why? Look at everything I've said throughout this video. Eggman has always been the antithesis to that of Sonic and the others, and while yeah, he holds his fair share of jealousy, he's not going to abandon everything he worked hard for because of a sad sob story, even if it is his own. Dr. Eggman in the Sonic movies is an antithesis to Sonic and his friends in every way, shape, and form. And even if they come from similar backgrounds of having their families ripped away from them, he's still going to do what he does best. Where Sonic and his friends have their found family, Robotnik will continue to be the one to stand alone and take the world by storm, like he rightfully deserves. But with all of that being said, this is honestly what I believe is part of Eggman's past in the film franchise. A child of the Robotnik household who got lost and forgotten in the carnage of what was left behind by Project Shadow, then manipulated and weaponized into a force they could easily control. But the Doctor forges his own path to world domination, and this backstory only makes it even more reason for him to be the one above all else. But that's also just what I think. What about you guys? Do you have your own theories for Project Shadow or the Doctor's involvement in it? Let me know in the comments below, as I'd love to have a discussion about this. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow my social media, and donate to my Ko-fi if you can. I also want to apologize for some of the audio in this video. I know it cannot be the greatest, and some of my delivery is weird. I was kind of fighting a cold when I recorded this, but I'm like, I gotta get this out as soon as I can before that Sonic Movie 3 trailer comes out. And as of now, on the 22nd of August, there still isn't a Sonic Movie 3 trailer, but hey, I'm here, and I finally made this video after so long, so once again, just thank you all so much for just giving me your time, attention, and energy. I want to be doing more YouTube, so let's see what happens here. But I think that's it. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Leo Kojem, a warping out.